And the American Civil War is less a glorious march to freedom now. It is more a desperately clumsy, bloody, and often incomprehensibly managed mess of a war. Political conflict has ripped the young nation in two, and the breakaway Confederate states are resolute. Foreign powers are currently circling like vultures, and they are hungry for Southern cotton. The Union desperately needed a win, and then General George B. McClellan was handed a gift. He was the man who specialized in high-visibility inaction and was forever whispered about. He was whispered about as a fraudulent commander, but was handed the greatest gift. It happened in an abandoned Confederate campsite where a corporal was presumably foraging. He was looking for something more substantial than hardtack and stumbled upon a cigar case. Inside was Special Order 191, which was no ordinary paper, but Robert E. Lee's own dispatch. It detailed every troop disposition, every maneuver, and Lee's audacious plan to invade Maryland. It detailed the plan to move on Washington, D.C., and was the equivalent of finding a chessboard. It was like finding the enemy chessboard mid-game with pieces labeled checkmate in 3 moves. McClellan, or Little Mac as he was known, read it. And he read it again as his chest swelled. This was vindication and proof that he was destined for greatness, despite previous failures. He had previously botched the capture of Richmond with painstaking thoroughness before this. He had the plans and superior numbers, and everything necessary to end the war right here. And what exactly did General McClellan do with this gift of tactical omniscience? He simply waited for a full 2 days after the preliminary South Mountain battles occurred. Little Mac performed his signature move of cautious hesitation, while Lee concentrated forces. Lee concentrated his scattered forces around the small town of Sharpsburg, Maryland. McClellan finally arrived on September 16th, having wasted 48 priceless hours of time. That time allowed Lee to consolidate a nearly indefensible position for the coming fight. The stage was set for a tragicomedy of errors that would become the single bloodiest day. As the sun began to set on September 16th, Major General Joseph Hooker's 1st Corps crossed. They crossed the Antietam Creek and were engaging the outermost Confederate defenses. Lee was a man who actually understood simple signaling and immediately grasped the thrust. He grasped that the main Federal thrust would fall on his left flank and acted promptly. He assigned command of that flank to the legendary and terrifyingly competent Stonewall Jackson. Now, while Hooker's movement seemed to telegraph the Union strategy, the exact plan is hard. It is hard because it is McClellan, and clear, decisive plans were not his brand of command.
Forward into the corn.
But Hooker's aggressive probe suggested that McClellan intended to use an echelon assault. This is a strategy that sounds absolutely brilliant in theory as you hit the enemy line. You hit the enemy line sequentially pushing against various points in a wave-like fashion. The enemy is forced to constantly commit and recommit their reserves to stop each new push. Theoretically, they run out of steam while your army keeps delivering fresh, punishing formations. The enemy line finally snaps, and McClellan's grand echelon assault was supposed to begin. It began with Hooker in the north, grinding down the Confederate left, then pushes under Mansfield. Pushes under Generals Mansfield and Sumner would hit the center and the glorious coup de grace. It was to be delivered by the impressive facial hair pioneer, General Ambrose Burnside. He was swinging wide on the southern flank, and it was, as noted, a brilliant plan of attack. Unfortunately, it was a plan that McClellan had chosen to share only with himself and his chief. As the troops were deployed aimlessly throughout the night of September 16th, confusion reigned. Reserves sent to reinforce Hooker arrived at 2:30 a.m., having received almost no time to rest. At 5:43 a.m. on September 17th, Hooker's men marched south towards Dunker Church, assuming circles. Roughly half an hour later, they stumbled right into Stonewall Jackson's forces holding a line. The line stretched from the notorious Cornfield to the East Woods, and the Federals pushed. They drove the rebels out of the East Woods and the Cornfield, squeezing them into West Woods. They went directly into the kill zone of 14 Confederate guns on Nicodemus Hill. And slaughter. Hooker recalled that the slain lay in rows precisely as they had stood in their ranks. In under 2 hours, the Confederate position was devastated and the Stonewall Division mauled. But luckily for the Confederacy, McClellan's brilliant echelon assault plan meant rest. The entire rest of Lee's army was just standing around, unengaged, and available to help. Lee was able to pull 2 brigades under John Bell Hood, whose troops were famously ragged. These gray-clad scarecrows crashed into the Federal onslaught, and the fighting stalled. The plan called for Major General Mansfield's corps to drive into the Confederate center. Naturally, Mansfield was not apprised of this, as it is basic operational security after all. Do not tell your generals the plan, lest they accidentally act decisively in the battle. When word of Hooker's struggle reached Mansfield, he just assumed his duty was to support. Hooker advised Mansfield to dig in and fortify the East Woods and conserve his men. Just like that, the entire momentum of the assault series was broken, and Federals hunkered. Mansfield, attempting to coordinate his forces, decided to ride toward the front of the line. This is where the comedy truly turned tragic, as the general was stopped dead in his tracks. He was stopped by his own horse, which stubbornly refused to jump a modest fence in the path. Mansfield had to dismount and lead his mount on foot somewhere in this tragicomic detour. In the fog of war and the chaos of his own forces, General Mansfield was fatally shot. He was not shot by a rebel sniper, but by an unknown Union soldier mistaking him for a foe. The Union had lost a corps commander to a horse's stubbornness and a Union soldier's aim. Then the Union lost a second commander when Hooker was shot in the foot. A wound serious enough, this left General Alpheus Williams in command of the massive Federal force in the north. Williams defaulted to the only thing he knew, which was attack, and ordered an assault. The battered Union forces broke out, and after more bitter fighting, secured the Dunker Church. It was 8:15 a.m., and the battle was 2 hours old, and the Union had achieved positional victories. 15 minutes later, the first elements of the Federal Second Corps arrived under Sumner. Sumner's men were due over an hour ago, another casualty of the Federal logistical brilliance. Sumner advanced to link up at Dunker Church, and the combined forces drove against Jackson. But the rebels faced no grand coordinated charge, as planned in the echelon concept of attack. Instead, the Federals came piecemeal, division by division, staggered by time and incompetence. These staccato offensives were easily driven off by Jackson, who calmly brought his strength. Lee sent 2 more brigades from his southern positions to reinforce Jackson in the north. The now twice reinforced rebels launched a full counterattack, descending on the Union left. The Federal line shattered, and retreating Federals ran right into the advancing 6th Corps. General Franklin was keen to actually give the rebels a fight, and made his feelings known. A full-blown dispute broke out over whether to continue running or turn and fight the enemy. The situation got so bad that McClellan himself had to be called to the front line to help. While the generals were bickering, others under General D.H. Hill were facing a Federal offensive. They were at the Bloody Lane, a sunken farm road in the center of the battlefield. Hill's command had been severely mauled at South Mountain, but absorbed remnants of formations. It was a real patchwork quilt of an army, held together by willpower and dirt in a trench. The Union forces under General French charged headlong at the emplaced Confederates. They were turned back time and time again, and French's men paid dearly for every attempt. Not even reinforcements from the famous Irish Brigade, charging under a hail of fire, could win. The Bloody Lane lived up to its name, quickly filling with bodies until the moment of tragedy. General Robert E. Rhodes spotted a perceived gap in the Union line and ordered a countercharge. It was stopped dead by quick Union maneuvering, so Rhodes ordered a subordinate to position. This order was somehow catastrophically misunderstood as a command for a full retreat. Rhodes could only watch, dumbfounded, as his entire right flank withdrew, followed by the rest. The rebels literally abandoned Bloody Lane, handing their perfect defensive position over. The upshot of all this chaos was that Lee's forces were now almost entirely concentrated. This meant that General Ambrose Burnside was now on deck for the next stage of the assault. McClellan had allegedly ordered Burnside to advance over the Antietam Creek Bridge at 800 a.m. Hypothetically, Burnside should have been able to steamroll over the bridge by noon. But Burnside, whose pride was still wounded, essentially ignored McClellan's orders. This was not a general consumed by caution. This was a general consumed by pettiness. It took a second written command, followed by a personal visit from the Inspector General. This bureaucratic temper tantrum cost the Union 5 catastrophic hours of fighting time. When they finally got to the bridge, his forces drove away skirmishers before splitting up. Defending this crucial choke point was a single rebel brigade under General Robert Toombs. The Union fought hard and finally took the bridge, but because of Burnside's monumental stalling, he now had to take more time, another 2 hours, to consolidate his men before driving on. It was 2 p.m., and the fighting in the north had concluded in a chaotic, bloody draw. Lee's army was utterly spent, and all his reserves were committed or destroyed in the fight. But Lee had a saving grace, as he had sent a desperate message to the garrison at Harper's Ferry. Now the first trickles of Confederate reinforcements under A.P. Hill began arriving. It was time for the final Federal assault on Lee's center, defended by that patchwork of divisions. Burnside's men were finally ready to begin at 3 p.m. and ordered an echelon attack. The Federals started strong, pouring into the outskirts and overrunning several rebel positions. But almost as soon as the fighting began, Hill's main force from Harper's Ferry took the field. Crucially, many of Hill's men, having just come from capturing a supply depot, wore blue. The sudden appearance of these blue-clad Confederates sowed total confusion in the Federal ranks. Hill's men intercepted a Union drive to swing around the rebel right flank, pushing them back. Burnside, in a stunning final display of actual competence, committed his reserves to answer. The short-lived triumph of Hill's dramatic arrival was replaced by a bloody stalemate. The rebels held on tight, and both sides slugged it out until darkness mercifully fell. After all the blood death and wasted hours, neither side could truly claim victory. The Battle of Antietam saw 22,717 Americans become casualties in just 12 hours of combat. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia left the field a hollow shell, and his staff begged him. Lee doggedly refused, declaring that if McClellan wanted to try again come morning, he would wait. And what of McClellan, as his men had not fared much better? But he still had massive reserves. Instead of attacking, McClellan ordered his artillery arrayed on the high ground to defend. He had been handed the enemy plans, held a 2-to-1 advantage, and achieved positional victories. The next day, September 18th, Lee was finally convinced to withdraw across the Potomac River. The Confederacy's ambitions of invading Maryland and taking Washington went up in smoke. While McClellan managed to turn a guaranteed victory into a bloody draw, strategically it won. It was enough to allow President Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation to the world. It reframed the Civil War in the eyes of the world as a fight to end slavery and stop support. The way was now clear for the Union to strike back at the Battle of Fredericksburg. But that particular story, as they say, is a tale reserved for another video discussion.